Thank you, Andrew and BERC, for inviting me and others. My name is Shiraz Haji. I'm the CEO of a company called the Clean Tech Group. And maybe just a word on me before we kick it off and on what we do. We cover innovation globally around clean tech, and water has been a big area and a really growing area of interest for us. So we serve big companies, investors, and try to help them figure out what to do around this space, but really around new technologies, new business models. So I do think there are some major challenges in water, but maybe kind of my opening thought is we have been incredibly impressed over the last 12 months with the growing interest amongst investors, amongst big companies. It is quite common when I go and meet with a private equity investor and say, hey, solar, wind, energy efficiency, waste, what do you guys want to talk about? Water. We're trying to figure out where do we play in water. We're totally bought into the macro challenges. We're totally bought in that there's got to be a major economic opportunity. So that's one of the things we spend a lot of time doing, is trying to dissect what are the challenges and where are the opportunities. I've got a lot to say on it, but we've got 58 minutes and 47 seconds and 3 awesome speakers here. So what I think I'll do, Andrew suggested about 10 minutes max each. I'll hand over the microphone to David first, David Sedlak, and ask each of you guys to introduce yourselves. But we have David from Berkeley, Richard Harris, who I've gotten to know a little bit through our work from East Bay Mud, a real leader in really pushing a utility to think through conservation, and Linda Hunter from the Watershed Project, who I've just gotten to know, but I'm real eager to hear more. So David, over to you to kick us off.
I have to run the slides, I think. So is that okay here, Andrew? Yeah.
Do you want Andrew to move the computer to that red chair first?
I think I'll go digital and then leave the analog to Peter. So I got asked by the group, the BERC group, and first of all, I want to thank BERC for having me here. It's a real pleasure that you organized this. I think it's a great way for me to learn something and give something back. But I got asked to talk about aging infrastructure. And I think my inclination is to want to be talking about the solutions to the problems, not the problems themselves. So before I do that, I just want to introduce myself and tell you something about Renew It. So I'm a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UC Berkeley. I'm an environmental chemist by training. And about 10 years ago, as I dealt with some of these issues related to trace organics in the environment and water recycling, I saw that there was this really larger issue beyond the water quality related to the infrastructure and the future of infrastructure. And together with some colleagues at Stanford and Colorado School of Mines and New Mexico State University, we put in a proposal to the National Science Foundation to establish an engineering research center. And it's called Renew It. It stands for Reinventing the Nation's Urban Water Infrastructure. And it's a project that's designed to do many of the things that Peter just talked about in his remarks. And in fact, Peter's one of our Science Advisory Board members, because the kinds of things that he's been thinking about and that folks at the Pacific Institute have been thinking about are exactly the kinds of things that we want to do. So at Renew It, we think about rainwater harvesting. We think about groundwater and aquifer recharge. We think about water recycling. And we think about the institutions that will need to change to make all of this happen. And so for the BERC students, I encourage you to come see us at the Berkeley Water Center in O'Brien Hall. Contact us about how you might be able to get involved, because we're really appreciative of this kind of new interest among students in this part of the energy and resources problem. So I also subtitle my remarks here, You Can't Get There From Here. And I think that's also an important question to realize, is that we have the infrastructure that came to us by way of the Romans and the aqueducts and sewers that they pioneered, and the drinking water treatment plants that we used to solve the problems of typhoid fever, and the clean water systems that we developed in response to Lake Erie and its problems in the 60s and 70s. And we have a massive investment in this urban water infrastructure. And before we can go down the soft path, before we can adopt all these new technologies, we have to think about how we can create hybrids of the existing infrastructure and the new ones. So very much like if we're going to electrify the automobile fleet, there's an intermediate step of hybrids. And so really thinking about how we get there from here is what I'd like you to take away from my brief remarks. So an overview of what I want you to think about as we go forward is this issue of infrastructure lock-in. That is, we have this system that we've invested in, we've had the institutions that keep these things going, and basically we call them centralized systems. They're big investments, and we can't just abandon them and replace them with something new overnight. The other thing I wanted to show you, and just to get started in the discussions, and I do want to keep my remarks brief, is this idea that these systems are reaching the end of their design life. So the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act and the investments and some of the quirks about the way you manufacture pipes and build systems mean that many of them are wearing out at exactly the same time. So that can be seen as a problem because it means increasing rates to ratepayers. It can be seen as an opportunity because we have a chance to replace it with something new and better. So I want to leave you, before we go in the panel discussion, with this issue of this end of the design life and the recognition that centralized systems may not be the answer, as to start thinking about what a hybrid really looks like of a conventional, what I would call a third-generation water system, and the new water systems that will replace them, the fourth-generation water systems. So here are a couple of things that tell you about what is referred to in the civil engineering community as the infrastructure gap. So one of these is a table out of a CBO report, which compares the EPA study and the CBO studies of the gap between what is collected to keep the existing water and wastewater infrastructure operating and what would be required to run it in a good manner. And so what you can see, and I don't want to go into the numbers here, I just want to mention that there's this thing called the gap analysis, and there's a gap between what's collected and what's needed to keep the systems running, and that means that water rates are increasing. They're increasing at an average of somewhere around 5% per year in much of the country. And so this is a stress that means that when you want to go somewhere new, when you want to get somewhere else from here, you may have to fight the problem that you're spending more money not only on replacing equipment, paying for power and electricity, paying for the labor to run the systems. It really limits your options to do something new with the existing institutions. The other thing I wanted to show you is this figure here on the bottom, which is from an old EPA report, but it hasn't changed since then, and that is that in the old days, in the heyday of the Clean Water Act, the federal government gave us grants to build sewage treatment plants. And those grants were replaced by a revolving fund where people paid in and it paid back out, and it made it a lot less attractive to invest in this new infrastructure. So when you think about where the country's going in terms of federal government giving grants for people to build things, we ain't going there anymore. And so that's another stress that means that there's an infrastructure gap just in terms of keeping things going or doing something new. Coincidence with this infrastructure gap is something that the American Water Works Association calls the replacement era. So this is from a report that, again, came out about 10 years ago, which was called The Dawn of the Replacement Era, where the American Water Works Association was talking about how much money was going to be spent in replacing the pipes and the sewers that are under our streets now. And there's a quirk of the manufacturing process. The way in which people used to make pipes in the 20s meant that those pipes lasted a long time because they had very thick walls. And in the 30s and 40s, they were able to make them thinner through some better manufacturing processes, but that meant that they didn't last as long. People didn't realize at the time enough material science about how to manufacture pipes. And then pipes that were put in later had longer lifetimes. So there's these two cohorts of pipes, sewer pipes under our streets, that are wearing out at about the same time. And that means that we're entering what's called the replacement era. This is the top figure here is a figure of what the costs are going to be nationally to replace the water infrastructure. The bottom is East Bay mud. And so you can see that East Bay mud, for example, we're going to see about a factor of 4 increase in the amount of money we spend each year just to maintain the sewer. So if you've driven up Euclid Avenue and seen the East Bay mud trucks there at all hours of the day or night, that's because those breaking pipes are going to break and break more and more frequently. So Peter mentioned in his remarks the idea of distributed systems, the decentralization of systems. This is one of the things that we're spending a lot of effort in Renew It. I put in here a little snapshot of a dormitory at Colorado School of Mines that's attached to a membrane bioreactor. And that membrane bioreactor system is able to treat the water and creates a source of water that can be used for landscaping around the dormitory. It can be used for toilet flushing within the building, but it may in the future, if we play our cards right with technology, actually be able to recycle that water to the point where it's of potable quality. And so by putting something like a ceramic nanofilter in there and pairing it up with a disinfection system, you might actually be able to close the loop on an individual building, much like the space station closes the loop. And these things are not really all that far out of the future. And I want to kind of present this kind of more futuristic vision of water recycling at the building scale to give you an idea that there's a really interesting challenge when we think about a hybrid system of infrastructure where you go from centralized to decentralized, and there's an interesting question of scale. Do you do this at the neighborhood scale and build satellite treatment plants and then force yourself into building purple pipe networks to distribute water around for landscaping? Do you do this at the apartment complex scale so you could reuse all the water on site with a modest area of a second distribution system? Or you do it at the individual household scale and you put it on the homeowner? We still don't know where that comes in, but there are incredible technological challenges and opportunities that will play out differently based upon what we decide about the institutions, the economics, and the incentives we create. And so that's something I just wanted to put out there to start this discussion about what a hybrid system might look like. So getting there from here, this is a figure of a project that we did in Renew It in Bellingham, Washington, where the city of Bellingham had GIS data looking at what where the city's water pipes were, where the sewer pipes were, where the sewage treatment plants were, and knowing something about the elevations, knowing something about where the people live, where the wastewater is produced, where the water demand is, we could make projections about what this new hybrid system might look like. And I think that that's the challenge, and I think as we're developing this research within Renew It, thinking about what a hybrid water system is, we start to have a view that not all cities are the same and not all parts of the cities are the same. So for example, if you think about development on the outer edge of a city, there may be more opportunities to think about these distributed treatment systems, these satellite plants on the edge of a city where you're building new infrastructure as opposed to retrofits in the center of the city. And then when you think about these edge communities, you're not being committed to the sewage infrastructure. So for example, when we think about water conservation alone is not the answer, because when you get to a certain point with water conservation, the sewers stop working. Sewers were designed to work with a certain solids concentration. And in parts of Europe where water conservation has gone further than they have in the United States, the sewers are corroding like crazy, because they weren't designed for that high solids content. And then you have to operate the sewers in a new way, and that could be a lot more expensive than anything you do with conservation. So if you think about this hybrid of moving from the existing centralized system to decentralized systems in a spatial manner, you might decide that maybe the edges where people are planning to put in new housing developments might be the place to take advantage of it, and then these edge cities or these edge communities are off the grid. And so I could never imagine Manhattan being a fully distributed off-the-grid area, but I could imagine the suburbs around New York City the same way I could imagine a lot more opportunities in the Livermore Valley or over the hill in Walnut Creek than I could in downtown Oakland. So with that, I think I'll end my remarks so we can get on with the discussion. I hope I gave you some food for thought, and hopefully our panel discussion will pick up on these ideas later.
Sounds good. I'm going to ask one short question between each of the speakers. But yeah, please, David. Thank you. Because some people might not be as well versed in this, what's wrong with aging infrastructure? Why is it bad? We write about leakage, but a little bit of water leaks. What's the big deal? Why is it a bad thing?
I can tell you two things. I mean, one is three things. One is the loss of water. So the typical United States water distribution system is losing between something like 10 or 20% of the water we put into it. So it's like having a leaky system. It leaks out, then that's water that you wouldn't have to go and get in the first place. But then there are a couple of other problems. One is the environmental impacts of leaks. So not only leaks in sewer systems, which cause contamination of surface waters and pollution of water supplies, but even leaks of fresh water. So when a water pipe in Berkeley breaks, that water is full of chloramines. that finds into surface water. That could be really harmful for the aquatic organisms. And then there's just the infrastructure damage. Anyone who's lived near where a water main break has happened and seen a home flooded or a street ruined, that's a huge cost for a city.
Yeah. Great. We'll go to Richard now. And Richard, I'll ask you to comment. There was a question earlier in the last session, in Peter's session, around culture. So maybe as part of your opening remarks, you could just touch on the cultural issues in our industry around innovation, if you don't mind. But Richard Harris from East Bay Mud.
Hello, everyone. Happy to, and I will address this a little bit in my comments with my slides, but I think this relates to the risk-averse question. And by nature, due to public health that Peter touched on and other challenges, we are not as nimble as I wish we were as an industry. We would consider ourselves in the water industry to be progressive. It varies by size and location of water utility, but we go slow, and we need to think things through and then rethink them through and then ask people to tell us to implement what we thought about. And that's just the nature of the business. So my hope, and what you'll see in my talk, is I think we're at a small paradigm shift in how even utilities with some of the investment community that's been mentioned, and what I'm seeing happen in the business sector, really in response to the combination of a drought and an economic recession that is really getting us to rethink some of these things, and the challenges with aging infrastructure, that we have to re-engineer ourselves and our thinking and work with our policymakers and the community who elects our policymakers to demand more of us quicker.
Great. I don't know if,
now I'm going up there?
Yeah,
okay.
Please do. Whoops.
Well, I just used all my time, so page down. Well, thank you to BERC and Andrew and the rest of the planning committee for inviting me here. I am also a Berkeley resident, so it's good to be home. And Peter, congratulations on the 25th anniversary. If you look up at the screen upper left, this is our 90th anniversary for East Bay Mud. But I can say that you've done a lot in 25 years that I would not equate to that we need to catch up in a lot of ways. I'm going to go quick here, and I apologize for the number of slides. When Andrew said you have 10 minutes, I said 5 slides, triple that. I can get through 15 in 10 minutes. But hopefully I'll leave them up here long enough so when the video pauses, if you're watching it later, you can get the information. But really what I want to focus on, and perhaps my talk could be titled, The Travels and Adventures of a Used Water Salesman and a No Water Salesman. And that's the perspective I want to give you, because that's my expertise, is demand management and how it really fits in with the challenges that we've experienced and we see coming on the horizon. And as Peter said very eloquently, these issues have been around. They're not going away. Some of the challenges are getting more dire in a lot of ways. We do have a lot of technology. We feel like we've been at the table before. We're making some decisions that were beneficial in the past, but we also continue to repeat mistakes. And right here, these 3 areas where we compete amongst ourselves for either best water quality or limited supply, or as Peter said, and I'm going to focus on distribution and allocation is really the challenge. And then what does that do to our communities and our environmental stewardship and other stressors in the ecosystem? And as we invest in our water infrastructure, we have to keep in mind our habitat and quality going forward. So those of you that have been around California, actually, I was born in Berkeley, so I'm really home. But I've been here all my life, and so I've lived with the challenges of droughts and water shortages. And I would agree also, we do have a lot of water. It's just how we use it, how we move it around, and how we time it. But so this is historical, 80, 90 years, and it's about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and this is what we can expect. All of our modeling in our watershed is 3 out of 4 years are going to be less than normal. So it's no surprise. And over the most recent decade, we saw the same. Real quickly, the key issue also for those of us who benefit, we have our own watershed up in the McCollum watershed in the Sierras, and we have very high quality water. But the challenge is, where is the snow going to fall? And when the snow falls, how much water content is that they're going to be there for our spring and winter reservoir? And on the far right is where it's at as of March 1st. So, sorry I didn't have 2012 up there, but for this year, we're at about 65% of normal, and everyone knows it's wonderful May weather, February weather, March weather outside, but this looks eerily like 2008, and in 2008, for our water district, the bottom fell out. So we'll see what happens. We're going to be fine this year because of carryover storage last year, and because all of you who live and work in East Bay Mud's territory, thank you very much for saving. But this is one area, and David touched on this. And what this chart shows is the U.S. water and wastewater rates, how they've been increasing over about a 15-year period since 1998 in comparison to consumer price indices. And this is a key thing, and I want to give credit to the American Water Works Association and Raftelis Group who put this together. But this is what it's been. And so if you look at the cumulative increase, it's 80% increase in water and wastewater rates over that 15-year period. But that's nowhere near what needs to happen to get after and renew the aging infrastructure that David mentioned, and let alone figure out how we're going to pay for that new infrastructure and roll it into an economic model that's sustainable for utilities and communities. I feel very good saying that over the next, I think less than 15 years, next 10 to 12 years, water and sewer prices are going to have to about double. And that's the true value, what we need. And you'll be hearing with East Bay Mud, we've been working hard on getting this information out, because that's where our more near-term rate increases are going to go after. We're pretty good on supply. We have some recycled water and some conservation, but we need to renew about 4,200 miles of pipe underneath the streets here in Berkeley and elsewhere. And many reading the paper heard about our Dingy line, which runs under Highway 24 that we're working on right now. And just to let you know, we'd actually planned to replace that beginning this spring through next year. And of course, time got the best of us. It decided to have an emergency rupture before we got to it. So planned renewal is much more cost effective than emergency repair. I won't have time to go into this, but there's been a lot of good effort, both at the regulatory legislative effort, both at local, regional, and state and federal levels. We could get into discussion. Maybe if some of the Q&A goes here, I can talk about some of the standards codes and other things that are really resonating and galvanizing the water industry. One of the key things that we have to do, and most water utilities that are about 3,000 customers and higher have to, every 5 years, prepare an urban water management plan. This was based on a law passed in 1983. What it does, it says every 5 years, we would like you to report to the state about your system, your supply, your demand, your growth projections. What is your drought contingency plan? How are you being efficient with your resource? And this is getting better and better, and raising the bar for us to be better in doing so. Latest information is right here on the screen, but these reports that were presented here in the last couple years, and the Department of Water Resources just got through all of them, because there's many of them, represents about 92% of the state's population. And we heard earlier about the 20% by 2020. Many of you know about the Water Conservation Act and the governor's call previously. So in these reports, this is the baseline of what all those water utilities presented, that using a previous baseline of about 200 gallons per capita per day, and this is the gross water production, so don't think of it as everyone in a house using this. This would take total water production in the state divided by state population for those areas. And what they reported for their targets by the year 2020 is getting that down to 167. So very good movement. If you want to meet the state's challenge of 20, it's got to go a little lower to 160. Now I can say amongst friends here and great customers who are saving, East Bay Mud today, we're at about 133. So the challenge for me as a no water salesman and working with our board and getting our programs out is and actually when Peter was talking earlier, we're using the same amount of water today, if I speak before the economic recession, that we were 4 decades ago in 1975. 300,000 more people, 28% increase in accounts. Great job. We started at about 210 gallons per capita. We're down to 133. The last time I saw demand where it is today was back in about 1948 for our service area. So we've achieved about 30 years of demand management just today. But the question is, when we rebound, and we will rebound, we are, what is that new norm, and how do we as a utility respond to not having a peak and then have it invest a lot and educate to get back down, but how can we stay the course and have a soft landing? So one of the other great things out of the 20 by 2020 process was a task force that was created, just finished its work, a report to the legislature hopefully next month. And this was to develop best management practices for the business industry. And This was a challenge, and this is where I want to challenge all of us that we need better metrics, the information, and Peter talked about technology and process, but it's not readily available. And some other speakers are going to talk about this as well. And there is great opportunity to expand reuse alternative water supplies, but appropriately at the time they were created, but not appropriate today, is in the water code. A lot of these alternative water sources are labeled a waste, and they're a resource. Water is water, appropriate quality for the appropriate use. So I really want to focus on what I refer to as the water use efficiency supply chain. Now, as a utility practitioner, I look at ourselves as facilitators. We introduce customer to business and business to business, but it really is the community that saves the water. We just report the numbers. So these are the 6 key strategies that East Bay Mud and many of our peers are doing. A lot of progressive effort, even beyond what we're doing here in the East Bay. But I want to focus on the first 2 on the left. We've had a lot of saturation with shower heads and high efficiency toilets, almost slipped up there. But it really, I believe, going forward, because I have an economic background and a business background, it's about access to information, it's tools, it's dashboards, it's things that let the business and homeowner make better decisions that will affect a utility. And over on the far right-hand side, the other 2 are supply side and R&D. And I've mentioned our infrastructure issue. We're in a seismically active area, 4,200 miles of pipe. You think the average life of a pipeline could be 60 to 100 years. You can do the math how many miles a year we should be replacing. And we're probably at about 25% of that number. So what are the trends that we see happening? And this is happening throughout California as well as the West and other parts of the nation. But we are saturated. We're pretty good. Residential is homogeneous. We feel very thankful we've done that. We can move away and use our limited resources and invest in other areas to try to basically accelerate the market. And that's going to be an outdoor, supply side, and commercial industrial water use. We need to be more innovative. On-bill financing, starting to see that happen in some utilities. Pay-as-you-go loan programs rather than rebates and grants, so we can use the investment over and over and over again and have a revolving fund that we all play and pay. The other thing, and Peter mentioned smart meters, smart cities, that is key. And I'm going to show something on that here real quick because I'm going to run out of time, but I was on that long enough that the video will have it. We're very excited, but the water community is typically maybe 10, 15, 20 years behind the energy technology just by the nature of the innovation and the cost and the investment in the energy sector over water. But we are catching up. And I'm pleased that there's technology that allows us to really look at how we manage our commodity. Now, when we do asset management, when I'm asked, I say our number 1 asset is the water. A lot of times an engineer or an operator will think of a pumping plant and a pipeline. I'll say, well, that's just a conduit. The asset's the actual commodity we have. But is it really appropriate in today's environment and our day and age to talk to a customer 6 times a year, to bill them 60 days after they've already used the water? You pay for gasoline before you drive your car when you fill it up. You pay for groceries before you consume them. We have to think of a different way of communicating with our customer and giving them the value proposition for their consumption and the value of water to them. This is a website we've created for about 4,000 customers. They can see anywhere from hourly water usage, daily water usage, weekly and monthly. It's a website, password protected, and they can go in there every day, anytime they want, and looking at peregrine falcons or our water toolbox, Peter, and set a budget. Say, if I go over or my meter never shuts off, I think I have a leak, send me an email, give me a phone call. The other thing you're going to hear a little bit later is what I call information dashboards. We have not done a good job in the industry, and there's many studies, and we'll look in the mirror on this one, that we don't bill for our services and have good billing systems. And what's changed is in the past, customer information systems were looked at setting a bill, a water bill, but it wasn't about conveying information about that customer sector, that customer demand, indoor, outdoor, benchmarking with efficient homes or efficient businesses. So we have to reinvent ourselves about what we put on a water bill, or if it doesn't go on the bill, how we interface and send information back to the customer, because we have tremendous data. We're a unique utility. We have 40 years of water consumption data, yet a lot of it is stranded in in servers, and we cannot cost effectively yet get it quickly to our customers. There's a couple more areas I want to really harp on. I started my background in efficiency and energy before I came to water. I'm really excited about some of the work going on with the PUC and in the private investment circles. We have to keep going after the water energy nexus. We've dipped our toe in that pool. We have Assembly Bill 32. We have climate change issues. There's such great opportunity. When you look I'll pick the city of Oakland as an example. For 1,000 gallons of water, it might cost somebody $3. To treat that 1,000 gallons in wastewater would range for that same customer from $3 to $9. So when I sell efficiency, I go out to a business, I say, yeah, water efficiency, that's good, but let's talk about your wastewater, let's talk about your chemicals, let's talk about your energy consumption, and let's pool them, and then you'll get me my water efficiency. So the water use efficiency supply chain, it's our partners, it's all of us. And my goal is that through innovation and standards and codes and communication, is if the market is successful, our utility will be successful. And I guess my goal is to work myself out of a job. I don't see it happening yet, but if I do that, I've been successful. So, and that's all I want to say, and I'll look for questions later. But I want to thank Richard Young at the Food Service Technology Center. This is the most efficient energy and water using district.
All right, well done, Richard. Before Linda, just one quick question. You mentioned water tends to be behind the electricity utilities. The electric utilities have been working with decoupling and having more incentives for efficiency. Could you just comment on the state of incentives to water utilities for reducing water usage?
From a decoupling standpoint, or?
Do water utilities have an incentive to drive efficiency?
Oh, we do, and you've heard it before, and it depends by locale and size and other local issues. But if you can defer capital, I mentioned infrastructure, resources are limited, construction is more expensive. So if we can reduce capital, defer capital investment, we can fine-tune our operating costs. That's a good thing, because we have right now, our forefathers and our local planning, we're pretty good for East Bay Mud as far as future supply, but we're going to meet our future growth 100% with conservation, recycling, and minimum rationing during a drought. Where we are still looking at maybe some new either water transfers, maybe groundwater conjunctive use, is in those really dire situations where our Sierra supply is really curtailed.
All right, Linda Hunter, please step up to the podium, Executive Director for the Watershed Project, to give her opening thoughts.
Is it just this area here? Okay. Hi, thanks for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here and to bring a community perspective to this rather wonky discussion, actually. The Watershed Project, our mission is to engage communities in caring about their watershed projects. In fact, our mission is to inspire communities to understand, appreciate, and protect their watersheds. And we do this through a number of I think, really innovative programs. Because, you know, even questions like climate change are pretty complicated to the average person. And so while people here are all kind of part of the choir, you could go outside in January when it was 80 degrees and not raining, and people would go, wow, this is cool, let's go to the beach. They don't understand how it affects their personal lives, and so that's what the Watershed Project tries to do. We have 4 main program areas. I'm going to emphasize the 2 that are highlighted, but I do just want to mention that we have an environmental career initiative that is an internship program mostly for college grads or college students. And I'm delighted to say that many of these students have gone on to have very rewarding careers in the environmental field. We have a program called Healthy Watersheds that focuses on water quality and pollution and marine debris, and has a huge volunteer component. But I really want to focus on the last 2 programs because I think that they're very exciting programs that deal every day with the issue of climate change. The first one is called the Living Shoreline Initiative, and we work with a group of scientists called the San Francisco Native Oyster Working Group, but we involve high school students through a program where they go out and they pick up these bricks that we've placed all around the bay, and they bring the bricks back to our office, and we count the baby oysters called spat. Oyster reefs have been devastated world over, but there is some scientific evidence that says that oyster reefs can be just incredibly important by blocking tidal surges, like in what happened with Hurricane Sandy in New York. So the Watershed Project is actually building an oyster reef in Point Pinole. And we have about 40 reef balls built. This is what a reef ball looks like. They're actually kind of ugly until they get covered up with oysters. But the idea is that the oyster reef will not only provide habitat for other critters like salmon who are trying to fatten up before they make it their way back to the ocean, but things like gobies and worms, and they'll provide a natural environment that is now missing from our bay. I know there's a lot of effort to restore wetlands to the bay, which actually will be completely inundated if the predicted sea level rise washes them away. But if we have these oyster reefs, we can actually provide some protection from those tidal surges. And then we have another very cool program that's relatively new called the Greening Urban Watershed Program. And what it does is it works with communities to build low-impact design projects. The slide on the far right is a cistern that we worked with the PTA and the community in San Francisco at a school called Alice Fong Yu. And they have a native plant garden that's actually up on top of a hill. So we're draining the shed, you can see the stripy shed, and they're using the rainwater to water their organic garden. Then we have another very cool project. The Watershed Project about 6 years ago built a native plant garden in a nascent park in Richmond called the Richmond Greenway that connects the Ohlone Greenway with the Bay Trail. And we noticed every winter that every time it rained, the rainwater would just pour off of the bicycle trail into 2 ditches, and it would bring all of the trash and all of the legacy pollutants into the storm drain and bring it out to the bay. So we had this cool idea to build a bioswale, which is basically an engineered creek. So instead of the water rushing to the storm drain, it now meanders around like a creek would, and it also has beautiful native plants and trees that are also keeping the legacy pollutants in the ground. This is what it looks like today. This was all built by students and volunteers, and it's working too, and it's beautiful, and the community said, "Are you going to put fish in it?" But it actually only works during the winter, but it looks beautiful all year long. But probably the most important thing that the Watershed Project does is that we engage over 5,000 volunteers, and we teach over 3,000 students each year, because we want people to care about, on a microclimate sort of way, about their watershed. So I was telling Richard earlier that, if you teach a kid what happens to a piece of trash that's on the sidewalk, that when it rains, it will go into the storm drain, go into the creek, go into the bay, and end up in the ocean, they really get that, and they're quite moved by it. And so I think if you get them to care about their own watershed on a micro level, then they are more likely to come to the table, and we can have those conversations with that Peter was referring to when we make decisions about watersheds. And I think that's it for me.
Great. So if Andrew doesn't mind playing the mic, I've got a bunch of questions, but I'd like to integrate yours a little bit just to keep folks awake for the next 25 minutes or so. But I'll start, Richard, going back to you on the price has to go up, is what you said. And I'll just share a story. I was on a call this morning, the head of sustainability at a big company who's coming to a big conference we're hosting next week in San Francisco. She is talking about water, and she says, yeah, I'm really excited. I just got to tell you, it's been about 4.5 weeks that I've been trying to figure out how much we spend on water. I can't get to it. And so, but she can articulate how much they spend on energy real quick. So how do we get people to, how do we get the prices up so they matter, so then they make business decisions around it? What do you think needs to happen?
Well, I think Peter hit the nail on the head when he said it's a matter of perspectives, and really water pricing is. On balance, we have very good water rates, and I sit in the cheap seats in my job compared to maybe my policymaker, board of director, Andy Katz, who represents Berkeley, and there's a lot of pressure, both for many different stakeholders about what that price should be. And especially during the economic downturn, our board made a conscious decision to keep rates as low as possible because people were hurting in the community. They were losing their jobs, potentially their homes. So that was the right thing to do. We're a utility that's always had to try to have a 3 to 5% annual increase in rates, something similar, maybe a little lower for wastewater. So we didn't have a flat line and then a balloon payment that people can't plan for, businesses in their budgets and homes in their budgets. But really what's been happening, as David said, the gap analysis, and I heard just a couple weeks ago at another conference that the total gap analysis shows about $3 trillion nationwide between water and wastewater infrastructure. And the American Society of Civil Engineers gives utilities on both sides a D- on its infrastructure renewal and investment. So we're going to have to make the case and come to our constituents and say, this is what's needed. Yeah. And on balance, it's a good value.
Yeah. Feel free, Linda and David, to jump in if you want to on these, as you will.
I guess I had a comment on that relative to your demand management. I think that other cities that have tried to put more of the cost of water on a volumetric charge have run into real problems when there's a drought and people actually manage to conserve water. They run into financial crises. And so, when you talk to the resource economists who talk about water pricing, they say, heading down this road of making the consumer more concerned about their water use because of an economic penalty doesn't necessarily get you the long-term outcome that you want financially. So how much do you think you would shift your water bills to volumetric pricing in order to accomplish these dashboards and these consumer behavior modifications? So someone like you or I would save water because we want to do the right thing. But I think you're inferring that by smart meters and dashboards and things like that, people are going to do it because of a personal economic incentive.
I think it's both. And I'm glad you brought up the price structure, David, because I should have mentioned that. So for our utility, we're about 75% volumetric, 25% fixed cost through your monthly meter service charge. But when we look at it, and we're no different than a lot of utilities, if you look at the fixed costs of a utility, it's really reversed. And it's just the additional, and for East Bay Mud, we're very fortunate that our water, 95% of our water comes by gravity from the Sierras. And once it gets here, we serve more than half of our customers by gravity. So we have a very low overhead compared to maybe Southern California that has to pump over the Tehachapi. So in this time, especially if you're trying to get a good bond rating, everyone's arguing that this economic recession has taught us that we need to have higher fixed revenues to cover fixed costs. Yet also we know that if we can at least provide a price signal and have a little more volumetric, then people see the value. And what I hear from customer opinion surveys is that, this efficiency is a good thing. Yes, I've been saving for 10 years, and then a drought comes and you ask for more, and you raise my rate, and I don't really see the ROI, the return on that investment. So this is a struggle. Yeah. And I think but there are utilities that have 100% volumetric, and they still can sustain.
Yeah, let's take an audience question before my next one. Yeah, please. Right up there.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to hog the questions. I just had a question related to rates. Does East Bay Mud have tiered pricing? That's the first part of my question. So after you reach a certain threshold as a user, does your rate per gallon of usage go up? Because I know that that's something a lot of water agencies are either moving towards or talking about moving towards to try and incentivize what David was saying. And secondly, I was very encouraged to hear you say that East Bay Mud has an incentive to decrease the amount of water delivered to your customers. And that's fantastic. I'm just not sure that that's the case for the rest of the state in terms of the division between water agencies and like state water contractors.
So, all right. Tiered pricing.
Yes, we do have tiered pricing. It's for single-family residential, which is about 85% of our customer accounts, 65% of our demand. Tier 1 is about 172 gallons per day. That's considered the indoor need. It's a little outdated. Tier 2 is about discretionary use up to about 300, and then Tier 3 above that. And it's about $275 first tier, $3.25 second tier, and close to $4 third tier. We also have a pumping elevation charge, so if you live in the hills, you pay for it to get it to you. And I guess the other part is, we want to provide, our job is to provide clean, high-quality water. So we like people to use it, right, because that helps keep the pipes and dingy pipes repaired. But the idea was, we've made a commitment that it's all the above. It's an integrated resources plan, and because of where our nature of our environment and our climate is, we have to plan for those shortage years. So we have to build in the efficiency within the system.
And there's a quick question on, yes, you have an incentive. What about other utilities outside of California or outside of the Bay Area?
And do you mean an incentive as far as a rebate, or an incentive that they'll lower their bill, or?
Sorry. What I was trying to get at is
our utilities incentive. Oh, do we have a saving? Do we realize the savings by doing so?
More so, like a local water agency in Southern California might be incentivized to, encourage their customers to conserve, but just because they're taking less water as an area, let's say Orange County, does not necessarily mean that less water is flowing down from Northern California to Southern California.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, it's hard for me to speak for others in my peer group, but it all has to do really is the balance of that supply and demand. And, a lot of times I've had some trouble getting a recycled water project implemented here in the East Bay because of the no growth movement saw it as a way to free up water for growth. We all face that. But in reality is we're not the planning agencies, and Orange County isn't either. And so when a project is built or a community developed, we're responsible for providing healthful water. So that's where it's not an easy answer, but I would say all my peers, they have similar programs and similar challenges.
Linda, are you trying to get
Yeah,
please.
I was just going to say, and maybe Paula was going to talk more about this as well, but in San Francisco, where I live, if they assume if you live in an apartment building that 90% of the water is being spent on wastewater, but if you have a yard and lots of indoor plants, they will come out and audit your house, or if you have a drip irrigation system, and then the rate is reduced from 90 to 55%, and it significantly reduces your water bill. So, and San Francisco, I know, is a little bit different because there's a combined sewer system, and they can actually, see every penny that's saved by not treating the water. But I'm thinking about what Peter said about the real cost is in the water treatment, not the water delivery. So. Yeah. David, you got all that gravity.
I'm going to shift this a little bit and go back to the great chart you showed of a more flexible system. And we, the Clean Tech Group, talk a lot about going from a big centralized to flexible. But then we struggle a little bit with, who's going to drive this. I understand, and with all due respect, an academic center saying this makes sense, but when we translate to the real economy, who wants a decentralized water system?
It's a great question. I think that one of the big challenges of, when you look at it from 30,000 feet, you decide that perhaps a decentralized system has advantages with respect to resiliency, with respect to energy savings, with respect to a lot of the things we talked about here today. But the question of who's going to pay for an all-new infrastructure, I see that there are a few places where we create the opportunities. One is thinking about the spatial aspects of it, and when you have growth on the edge of the city, it's possible to do something very similar to what's been done in Chicago, where LEED certified developments jump to the front of the queue in terms of getting their permits. And so if you want to incentivize this behavior, you start thinking about green housing developments that adopt these kinds of technologies, and maybe people are attracted to live in them based upon their environmental footprint. So I could see that would be one way to do it. And the other way to do it is, I think, just when the pressure comes up, if the technology's there, eventually it becomes competitive with the new water sources and with some of the more expensive conservation that we're eventually going to run up against once we get the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. I'll invite Linda and Richard to chime in. And I just, in the spirit of trying to spark a little bit of a debate, I'm not sure I buy it. I buy it at the conceptual level, but then when I think about edge of a city, people say they like the idea, but they don't want a treatment in their neighborhood. They want a park. They want a basketball hoop. And so resiliency, I see it on the electricity side. I have a data center. I need that reliability. We don't see it yet on the water side. So maybe we'll invite these two to comment, and we'll go to the next.
Well, it doesn't have to be ugly. I mean, you saw the biosphere is actually quite beautiful. And in the case of Richmond, where that biosphere was built, it was a matter of environmental justice as well, because the footprint of that project is on an old railroad line that is full of legacy pollutants. So we're actually improving the quality of life for the neighborhood. And and you can incorporate projects like this within a park. I mean, you could do both. And I don't think it's just convincing people to do the right thing. It's just, showing them that it can be beautiful and improve their communities.
And one of the things we try to promote and other communities do, and it's a matter of our budget resources, is education demonstration projects. What we really find is we need to do a better job of getting the case studies and the success stories out. And we've looked at satellite recycling plants. We've done our best to support on a limited basis gray water and even rainwater catchment, which are other resiliency systems locally. But there isn't a lot of good information. And for a utility who's investing public ratepayer money, and if we are just looking at, for our perspective, we need to be educated as well. But when we're looking, and Peter mentioned this, or I think somebody did, about the where our rain falls and how dry it is, we want to invest that ratepayer dollar for the greatest community bang. And so my challenge, I feel my role is to network with the innovators, the designers and technologists and others like Linda's group and others that are implementing local community programs. And they need to pull at our services, and we need to support it, and it'll happen.
I guess, Shiraz, I wanted to mention that the photo I showed of the membrane bioreactor system at the dormitory, you wouldn't even know that was there. It's not like a sewage treatment plant that you would see. And I'm not advocating that distributed treatment is the answer to all of our problems, but when we talk about on-site wastewater treatment, we're using technology from the middle of the 19th century. We're using septic tanks. So it's hard for me to imagine that we can improve with information technology, material science, and biotechnology on that method of water treatment and supply to bring it to denser and denser communities, to a point where we facilitate local water reuse and we break free of this underground pipe network, which has led to this infrastructure gap.
Yeah, great. We're going to come back to that intelligence. Next question. Thank you. Yeah, we'll go there.
Hi, my name is Grace Soon. I'm from Berkeley Law School. This question is for Richard. I'm familiar with some of the energy efficiency conservation rationale for driving consumer behavior, namely comfort, health, kind of the ethic of conservation and cost savings, given that water use tends to be, I think you said maybe 10 to 15 years behind that of energy on terms of dashboards and smart metering. What do you think is the biggest driver of consumer behavior on the conservation front? Is it the conservation ethic or is it the cost savings?
Great. Very good question. On a select basis, it's the cost savings. There are some that, and I speak a lot to those that are looking at the stock market or other investments, and I'm sitting with an answer on water efficiency that's, 4 or 5-fold the return on investment, but the information isn't readily available. One example is I worked with a food manufacturing facility that it took 8 months to implement a 3-week payback project, but we stayed with it. But in reality, it's really that we have such a progressive community, and we've been at this for so long in the state, and there's a lot to do, but people do it because it's the right thing to do. It is about efficiency. We use conservation efficiency. It doesn't have to be a takeaway. We always say it's not about a lessening of a quality of life. It's an enhanced quality of life for many. Yet if I can find the different tools and the audience I'm working with, there really is something for everybody. And it's just a matter of making that really available, real time, simple, convenient. Yeah. That answered your question, I hope.
David mentioned intelligence, and having spent a bit of time looking at the water network, it's pretty dumb. There's not a lot of intelligence built in really understanding where leakages happen. So maybe I'd ask you guys to comment on how quickly is that changing, either from the customer side, as Richard was pointing to, really wanting more real-time data, or from a just infrastructure side saying, hey, let's go, big data, put some sensors there, try to actually look and see what's happening in the water network. David, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. I think that there is a coming sea change in the way we manage this infrastructure to turn it from dumb infrastructure to smart infrastructure, but it's got to be done thoughtfully. And I think there are a number of big differences between the electricity sector and the water sector that often go unrecognized. So I see one of the first places where there are really good opportunities is with real-time pressure management. So I mentioned that you lose 10 or 20% of the water through leaks. Partly we set the pressure in a lot of our water systems to whatever the maximum demand in the maximum season is, and leave it there. And if you have a garden hose and you know what it's like when you have the pressure on and you're not drawing the water out, the water comes out of every little crack. And so if we could adjust that pressure over the course of the day, we reduce the number of leaks, and we also extend the lifetime of the infrastructure. And that's one of the easier fixes. I think the harder question is, what is the role for smart meters? Can they really change consumer demand greatly? For water quality sensors, are they really going to be useful to us in detecting leaks? And I think the jury's still out on that, and we probably need a little bit more development on the technologies and familiarity with it among the utilities.
Yeah, I strongly agree with pressure. Anything? Let's do a couple more really short questions, so we get a couple more before the end.
Almost a comment, but invite our questions or comments also. Shiraz, and I'll start with you, David Rumler, Stanford University. It seems to me that just as in microgrids, the way you pay for those is you defer, or in some cases eliminate, the cost for transmission and distribution, right? Well, why not remote these, distributed treatment facilities? Why do the same thing? You're actually deferring or delaying investment in infrastructure.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to pay it off. I think I'll ask Richard and others to comment on that. I think Richard.
Well, I hope I addressed the comment correctly here, but one of the things related to both question and comment is, I'm an engineer. I like technology. I like data. That's what engineers like. But we are looking at, there's some cloud solutions that are coming to market for us that we're testing to see if we really like them. We're getting better at managing both sides of the water meter. And one of the things I think we still need is some of those distributed systems and maybe monitoring without the infrastructure need will really help us. I think technology at the end user, whether it's the smart controllers that David was referring to, or it's looking at leak management and distributed area metering, where we can actually meter parts of our service area, whether we have distributed supply or we're just trying to manage a pressure zone for that pressure management. A lot of that technology is there, but We haven't seen a lot of success with it. We're a little nervous. There's mergers and acquisitions. Some of the companies I was talking to a few years ago are no longer in business. So that is the challenge, that we're not going to do a whoops. And what I can tell you from a water conservation standpoint, when 1992, when the ultra low flow toilet came out, and what we did is we regulated it, then we actually thought, oh gee, we ought to design it and work with manufacturers and have a standard and a spec. We lost a lot of credibility because of people saying it's not working, I'm double, triple flushing, right? So whenever we do something, we're risk averse, but we're looking for our peers, our organizations, industry, trade groups to research that and bring a product that will work and keep that public trust high.
Great. We'll do a couple more real brief questions if we can, and then we'll be at the hour. We'll defer to Andrew whether we keep going or wrap. So.
Hi. Thank you. My name is Jeannie Wong. I work in the water sector affiliated with UC Berkeley and Eco Wong. I have a question about the water harvesting that a few people have been mentioning. And recently I was involved with some projects in Southeast Asia on water harvesting systems. And also in Berkeley, where I live, we've just replaced 150 feet of our rain gutter. So my question is, where do you think the leadership should come from in terms of incentives or making it easier for communities or individual homeowners to install or have rainwater harvesting systems or rain barrels? In Berkeley, there's a 130-gallon limit, and the permit process for anything over that is pretty arduous. Oakland Rainwater Harvesting NGO, there was a project, and they gave out all the rainwater barrels. So I'm wondering if there's going to be something else that's coming on from your leadership.
Linda would love to have you start comment on this.
I realized I forgot to mention that as part of our Greening Urban Watersheds program, we have been partnering with the City of Oakland to run their rain barrel harvesting program, and it's the most successful one in the country and far exceeded, paid for with ARA funds. Our goal was to keep 260,000 gallons out of the system, and now we're up to 340,000 with a couple of more months left in our contract. It's kind of interesting because as Richard will be the first to point out, I mean, you can't take a 60-gallon rain barrel and make much of a dent in water use or even water treatment. But in this case, we actually had an ulterior goal, and that was to keep people from diverting rainwater in the Oakland Hills into creeks and onto streets where it was causing massive erosion and probably still from the fire, the damage from the fire so long ago. And so I actually think these programs work really well on an NGO basis. And the education component, for example, the PUC offers another discounted rate, and we learned a lot about our program from them. But as I mentioned before, the PUC, if you keep a drop of water from having to be treated, it saves them money because they have a dual system. But from an education point of view, it gets people to think about, where does my rain come from? How does my watershed work? I mean, for so long, people have thought, oh my gosh, it's raining, let's get rid of this stuff. And that's what led to the whole infrastructure building. Instead, we should recognize that rainwater is a resource. And so I personally would like to see rainwater harvesting on every building in the Bay Area.
Great.
And along with green roofs and other LID strategies that can recognize what a wonderful asset rainwater really is.
Maybe, David?
Well, I wanted to give a slightly different perspective on it, because when you say rainwater harvesting, that implies that the water's used for some beneficial purpose. And one of the challenges of living in a Mediterranean climate is that when it stops raining about this time of year, you use up that water in the rain barrel pretty quickly. So in terms of preventing damage and hydromodification of streams, it's a wonderful strategy. There's another strategy emerging, and it's growing mainly in Southern California, where groundwater is a more important domestic supply, and that's the idea of actually capturing storms in large holding areas and infiltrating into the groundwater. And so in that case, it's something that's a little bit difficult at this point for the consumer to take on, because it involves having a large area to store the water. But Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, for example, is actually buying up old rock quarries and sand quarries and routing stormwater into them with the idea of recharging the drinking water supply. So there's another parallel movement in California of rainwater harvesting for potable water supply, and I think we're going to see more of it eventually in Northern California and the Bay Area, but not in areas where there's a flood concern associated with the hills.
Yeah. Should we do one last question, Andrew?
I think we're about time for a break.
All
if you
right.
do have questions, find our panelists at the break. You guys have been a great audience, great questions so far. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.